do. Girls prefer baby dolls more than boys do. Okay. Play style. Boys engage in and are drawn to rough and tumble activities far more frequently than girls. And this describes sex difference. This gender difference in behavior is described across cultures and occurs among juvenile mammals, including non-human primates. So in other words, boy monkeys are more rough and tumble than girl monkeys. And boy humans are more, in general, more rough and tumble than girl humans. Gender segregation of play. This is all now influences, we think, by hormonal changes within the fetus. During middle and late childhood, ages 6 to 12, boys tend to play with boys and girls with girls. If you go to a playground, I was talking, it's changed now, but when I went to elementary school, you had a girls' playground and a boys' playground. And you weren't supposed to actually go to the other playground. And then there was the DMZ, the in-between zone where those people actually had other gendered friends could meet briefly and talk to each other. But in general, we were split formally. But even without that, kids tend to sort of split off. So boys will play with boys, girls will play with girls, and they'll have the clubs and exclusion clubs, who's not allowed. This occurs in non-human primates as well. In non-human primates, it occurs much younger because they develop more quickly. So it's in 6 to 36 months. And it's true throughout the world and across cultures. So this is why we say it's probably biologically based. It's because no matter which culture you're in, we see similar kinds of activities and differentiations and separations. Play styles tend to be different. Boys tend to play in larger, hierarchically organized groups walled off from adults. They tend to play that way as adults too, right? Boys hang out together, and then who's the boss, who's the leader of the group, who's the follower. It doesn't change so much. Problem solving tends to be based on threats, intimidations, and humor, but not on cooperative negotiation. So if you see a group of boys, who's going to be the leader of that boy is the one who's going to be the biggest, the strongest, or the loudest, or the most, or the funniest. But it's not going to be because we all got along and we're nice to each other. That's not how boys tend to organize. Girls' groups are smaller, more cooperative and affiliative, and less hierarchical. So we tend to see less hierarchy, and that's true in general. When you see a woman's group, it's not quite as important who's the president, who's the vice president. They tend to switch roles more easily. Play styles, aggression is present in both groupings, but expressed differently. So it's not to say that girls are not aggressive and boys are aggressive. That's not what I mean by rough and tumble versus not rough and tumble. Rough and tumble is just a particular way of playing. Girls are equally aggressive, but they tend to express their aggression in different ways, like who's excluded. You go to a girl. I talk to a lot of girls who are in middle school and suffering because some girls spread some rumor about them and spread the word, and then suddenly they've lost all their friends. This is an aggressive act, but a boy will just punch out instead. So we all have aggression. We just get different ways of expressing it. And this tends, again, to be hormonally based. Other hormonal influences on gender. Gender role fantasy lives. Boys' fantasies tend to emphasize adventure, competition, exploration, and combat. Take a look at the video games they like to play. Right? These are the things they like to do. They make heroes of Superman, Batman, and others. That is, boys are looking for ideals of big, strong guys who do heroic actions. This is the kind of things that they find their minds drawn to. And they're drawn to video games that involve tests of strength and skill. I have a little girl I saw who brought in a video game that she was playing with me, and it was about how to cook pizza. That was the video game. I'll never see a boy playing that. I can't imagine what would happen in this culture, in this particular. Doesn't mean he wouldn't have an interest in it. But if he did, it'd be like, who could cook faster? Rather than, what are we going to make tonight? Again, more on general fantasy lives. Girls' fantasies tend to involve romance, marriage, child-rearing, homemaking, such as entertaining guests, socializing, preparing and serving food. That's not the only thing you can think of as a girl. We're talking about trends. So a girl may dream about being a profession, but they're also, part of their mind is thinking about taking care. That's part of inbred, that they can do that. As puberty approaches, boys develop erotic themes more frequently than girls do. It's not that girls don't have sexual thoughts, but the boys have them more. Girls are more likely to think about deep love relationships and starting a family when they start feeling erotic, and boys are more likely to just think about bodies. We know that there's a larger cerebrum in males, again, statistically, and it's thought that this is probably due more to intra-hemispheric connections. That is, there's a lot of connections within the hemisphere. So you have more white matter. But for girls, they have greater inter-hemispheric connections, so that there's more communication from the right lobe and the left lobe of the brain. More sort of talking to each side of their brain than there is with boys. Boys are more likely than girls to play with mechanical toys. Even one-day-old baby boys prefer to look at a mechanical mobile than a live face. That's in contrast to girls. So that's one of the ways we know what the preferences are, and those are sort of inbred and hardwired. Females tend to score higher on tests of emotion recognition, social sensitivity, and verbal fluency in trends. Cognition, some more, males are better at systematizing. All this is thought to be due to the effects of testosterone on brain functioning and brain development. That is, they tend to relate to others by assessing the rules that govern the system. How do you do something? Who's in charge? Females are better at empathizing. That is, the drive to identify another's mental state and to respond to those with appropriate emotions. So girls are a little bit better than boys at sort of figuring out the emotions, and boys are better than girls a little bit at sort of figuring out how some device works. What's the difference in sex drive? This is also hormonally determined. Men report spontaneous sexual desire and think about sex more than women do. This is probably not news to you. They have more sexual fantasies and enjoy erotica and pornography more. This is, this is a fact. Look, who's subscribing to the pornography sites on the internet? It's much less women than men. Not that no women are involved. Clearly they are, but less. Males masturbate more frequently than females, with the difference most notable at puberty. Sex drive. Girls and women exhibit a far greater degree of erotic plasticity than boys and men do. What do we mean by that? Is that girls have it's easier for girls to sort of shift between partners from male or female to other genders than it is for men. More rigid in their sexual orientation. Women are more likely than men to have participated in bisexual experiences. This is, we know by surveys. And among women, but not among men, sexual dissatisfaction is correlated with a relationship dissatisfaction. What does that mean? If a woman complains about the sex not being very good, she's also complaining about the nature of the relationship. If a man says, the sex isn't good, he doesn't care if the relationship works or not. Woman say, why would I have sex with you? I'm not talking to you. And woman says, and the guy says, what does that have to do with sex? Right? That's how it goes. And okay, don't talk to me. Just do it. And that's the difference. I have a patient complains that for her husband, having sex is being emotional. For her, it's like first you have the emotion, then you have the sex. And then he says, well, what do you mean? We just were intimate. She said, no, now we have to talk. But I'm tired. So this is a kind of a basic difference. It's sort of brain organized. It's not uncommon. You hear it in lots of relationships, and there's a reason for it occurring. Interest in infants. Even before puberty, females show a much greater interest in infants than males do in several primate species, including ours. Evidence supports this is related to the effects of prenatal testosterone. In humans, girls exposed to excessive levels of androgen prenatally. That is, for a while, some women are being treated with male hormones to help preserve pregnancies, and it caused some changes in the fetuses, including a statistical difference in their interest in infants. It's one of the changes that occurred. So if you have an illness like a congenital adrenal hypoplasia, which can also express too much male hormones in a female fetus, then we notice diminished interest in doll play and fantasies of marriage or motherhood. So it affects brain development. And these are the ways the brain development occurs through behavior. I mean, we see it in behavior. Okay, the next category. Birth gender assignment. So boys and girls are treated differently by the adults in their environment. This has also been studied. If you have a girl baby, people tend to hold the baby more closely. They tend to be more cuddly with the baby. You get a boy baby, the first thing people do is flip them. Oh, look at that. They tend to be handled more aggressively and more physically with more distance interactions. So that, You hold a kid away and wave them around, and if they're a boy. And if you're a girl, you say, oh, cute. We do that as a species. So what you're assigned to at birth has something to do with the way then you're going to be related to and how people are going to treat you and what they're going to be doing with you. So that affects your own sense of yourself and your gender. Right? If somebody thinks that you're a girl when you're born, even though you may be a boy, they're going to respond to you in the way that we respond to girls. And that's from the start. So you're going to be treated differently. You're going to experience yourself differently. And that experience of yourself in that relationship is going to have some effects on the way you imagine yourself to be in your gender as you develop your gender. We'll talk about how that happens. Errors in gender assignment can be related to later confusions in gender identity. That is, if you're called the wrong thing at birth because your genitals weren't very clearly identifiable, and we'll talk about how that happens, then you can feel confused, and people do. And anybody ever read the book Middlesex by GenderDev, the local author? So it's about a boy who was born with a particular genetic problem that caused your genitals not to be clearly identified as male. So he was identified as a girl at birth, and then during adolescence, he began to develop in a typical boy way, and he changed from girl to boy. But his initial thought about himself, given his initial treatment, was that I'm a girl. And then when puberty struck and he realized he wasn't, and that he wasn't feeling what other girls feel, and he wasn't developing as other girls do, then he realized he was a boy, and he wanted to be what he was, which was, what's called intersexed. And we'll talk about what that means. Okay. What are some of the causes for errors in gender assignment? How can that happen, right? Well, I mentioned this, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It occurs in 1 to 14,000 births in females. And some variants of this particular problem, this adrenal hyperplasia, results in excessive amounts of androgen hormones which will virilize, that is, masculinize the fetus. Will have clitoromegaly leading to mislabeling. So you can have a very enlarged clitoris that looks like a penis. And then the child's mislabeled. Other causes, androgen insensitivity syndrome. This occurs in 1 in 20,000 male births. In those kids, the testes are undescended, and the external genitalia look like a female's, even though the vagina is foreshortened and closed. That is, they may not have a fully developed scrotum. It may not have come together completely, but there's no real vagina because they have developed some. It's an insensitivity to testosterone, which means that they're less responsive to it. During puberty, testosterone is produced because they have testes, but it's changed to estradiol and it creates some feminine changes. So it's a very confusing picture for these kids. Other errors, 5-alpha reductase deficiency. This occurs in 1 in 40,000 male births. This is what the kid in Middlesex had. It was a genetic defect that occurred in a small village in Greece, according to the book. And this enzyme defect prevents the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, which is the active form in the fetus. So androgen receptors are functional. That is, the receptors for the hormone work, as opposed to androgen insensitivity. And testosterone is produced, which means at puberty, male changes take place. So you look like a girl when you're born, but then you begin to develop hair in the wrong places when you're in puberty. And your voice deepens, and you get more sexual interest in other girls, and you don't develop hips and breasts. So that's what happens with these kids. These individuals show the greatest gender plasticity. Some are raised as girls till puberty and then change their identity to male. There was I don't know if anybody's aware of it, a story that came out a few years ago of a boy who had an injury to his penis, and it was recommended very early on, during circumcision, the penis was cut. It was recommended, the parents said he be changed to a girl and be raised as a girl, which they did when he was at age 2. Then he was given hormones, then he was given surgery, he had his penis removed, he had a vagina formed and fashioned. And when he reached puberty, he was extremely confused about himself, and wasn't told what had actually happened, and he felt very differently than other girls. Finally, when he was in late adolescence, he was told what had happened, and he wanted to become a male. to be male, as he felt that he really was. And he ended up having lots of psychological problems and suiciding.